The Galactic Academy was nothing short of legendary, its halls stretching across several orbital stations above the planet Etra. In the heart of the Krethal system, it wasn't an academy in the traditional sense. It was more akin to an elite training ground for future leaders, scientists, and soldiers who would serve the Galactic Federation. Each student here was handpicked from their homeworld, based on genetic potential, intellectual capacity, or physical resilience. Some species prided themselves on their mental acumen, others on their nearly indestructible bodies, and a few on their mastery of technology or military tactics. The Academy's most feared course was the infamous Extreme Environmental Studies, taught by Professor Zilkron, an unyielding Krethalian, with scales that gleamed like obsidian and 4 glistening eyes that could see into multiple spectrums of light. Zilkron commanded a presence unlike any other in the Academy. He had overseen this course for hundreds of cycles, and every student who had faced it had walked away, if they could still walk, forever changed. Zilkron stood at the front of the classroom, silently observing the new batch of students. His 4 eyes blinked independently as he scanned the crowd. The students came from all across the galaxy, some from oxygen-breathing worlds, others from methane seas. Some evolved under the crushing weight of high-gravity planets, others on planets with thick atmospheres that nurtured delicate wings and fragile bones. The classroom was equipped with the latest technology to accommodate the vast array of species, with floating platforms for those with wings, water tanks for aquatic beings, and breathable domes for the more delicate species that couldn't tolerate the regular atmosphere. But no amount of technology could quell the anxiety that filled the room, especially with Zilkron about to speak. This class, Zilkron began, his voice low and gravely, is designed to push you to your limits. Every one of you has trained for years, and now, only those truly capable of surviving the most hostile environments in the galaxy will move on to the Galactic Federation's elite units. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Many students shifted nervously, their appendages twitching, their gazes darting around. Every student knew the statistics. Nearly a third of the class would be unable to complete the simulations. Some would fail because their bodies couldn't handle the extreme environments, and others because their minds would collapse under the strain. This class wasn't just about intelligence or strength. It was about survival. Professor Zilkron's eyes lingered on a peculiar figure at the back of the classroom. Sam the human. There had been rumors about him. Whispers floated around the Academy about his origins from Earth, the so-called Deathworld by galactic standards. Earth was infamous among scholars as a place where almost every environment was hostile. From scorching deserts to freezing tundras, from towering mountain ranges to deep oceans, Earth was considered one of the most dangerous habitable planets in the galaxy. Humans had evolved on this brutal world, surviving through sheer adaptability. Their resilience in the face of danger was legendary, but still, many questioned how such a seemingly fragile species could survive, let alone thrive, in environments that would break even the hardiest of galactic species. Sam sat casually in his seat, arms crossed, his expression relaxed and indifferent to the growing tension in the room. His unbothered demeanor was unnerving to the other students, some of whom had already begun to glance in his direction, exchanging anxious looks. To them he was a mystery, and his calmness in the face of Zilkron's ominous words made them even more uneasy. Finally, Zilkron's lips curled into something resembling a predatory grin. "Today's lesson," he hissed, his voice dripping with a mixture of pride and sadistic glee, "will be your first test. You will face the abyssal descent." Murmurs spread through the room. Even the most composed students showed signs of distress at the mention of the abyssal descent. It was the most notorious simulation, designed to replicate the conditions of a water planet, with a pressure gradient that increased exponentially as one descended into its depths. The simulation would simulate cold temperatures, crushing pressure, acidic environments, and hostile creatures that thrived in the deep. Zilkron raised his hand, silencing the whispers. "In this simulation, you will retrieve an artifact located at the bottom of the ocean. Only those who return it to the surface will pass. There is no time limit, but your lives, his grin widened, are on the line. Of course, they're simulated lives, but don't think the trauma of failure won't scar you. The pain will feel real. One student, a pale and fragile-looking creature from a low-gravity world, raised a trembling hand. Professor, what if the simulation goes wrong? Zilkran stared at the student, his expression unreadable. Then you will experience what true failure feels like. Prepare yourselves. As the professor finished speaking, the walls of the classroom shimmered and disappeared, replaced by the breathtaking view of a deep ocean. The air grew cold, and the lights dimmed as the simulation engulfed them. The students were now standing on the edge of an impossibly vast ocean, black as night, stretching out to infinity. Chapter 2. Into the abyss, the blackness of the ocean stretched endlessly beneath them. The waves gently lapped at the edge of the platform where the students stood, casting an eerie glow under the dim simulation lights. The simulation had been flawlessly rendered, using data gathered from some of the most dangerous water planets in the galaxy. The air was thick with moisture, carrying the unmistakable smell of salt and algae, while distant, otherworldly sounds echoed through the watery expanse. One by one, the students suited up in their various apparatuses. Each student's gear was tailored to their physiology. The aquatic creatures from the methane seas of Rahak equipped their hardened scales with extra layers to protect against the unknown dangers of this environment. The oxygen breathers strapped on deep-sea breathing apparatuses that would allow them to handle the crushing pressure. The first student to descend was Lethiri, an elegant swimmer from the water world of Gallion. Her species, which bore sleek, glistening scales and long, flowing fins, was built for deep ocean exploration. She slipped into the water with grace, disappearing into the depths with powerful strokes. Others followed, some more cautiously, others with determination, but all with a shared sense of trepidation. At the back of the group, Sam moved slowly, unconcerned. His equipment was basic, just a breathing mask and a thermal suit that looked comically underpowered compared to the highly advanced exosuits and aquatic rigs worn by the others. He stood at the edge of the platform, watching as the other students splashed into the water, their forms fading into the murky abyss. Professor Zilkran's voice echoed over the simulation, narrating the events with an almost mocking tone. The deeper you descend, the colder and more crushing the pressure will become. The weak will suffer first. The strong will make it farther, but none of you are safe. The abyss does not care for your rank or your power. Sam smiled slightly. Doesn't seem all that bad. One of the insectoid students near him, Krashik, a bulky creature with 6 legs and a natural exoskeleton thicker than most armors, snorted in disbelief. You're taking this far too lightly, human. You're not invulnerable just because you come from a death world. Sam shrugged. We'll see. Without another word, Sam dove into the ocean. He kicked downward, moving with a casual efficiency that belied the growing threat around him. As he swam deeper, the water grew colder, biting through his suit. The crushing pressure that had already forced some students to slow their pace was barely noticeable to him. Earth had taught its children resilience in a way no other planet could. Around him, the other students were struggling. Lethiri, despite her natural aquatic form, was feeling the strain. Her scales were tough, but the acidity of the water increased with every meter she descended, causing her to wince as the protective layer on her skin began to erode. Her breathing became shallow, and her strokes less graceful. Krashik's exoskeleton creaked under the immense pressure. The weight of the water was becoming unbearable, and he could feel his limbs locking up. Every meter became a struggle, as though the water itself was conspiring against him. Panic started to set in as his vision blurred, and he could barely see the objective ahead, a faint glowing artifact far below them. Sam, however, moved effortlessly. The cold didn't bother him. The pressure was something he had grown accustomed to during his training back on Earth, where humans had ventured into some of the deepest, most dangerous environments known to their planet. He had survived everything from high-altitude climbing to deep-sea diving, and this simulated ocean, as advanced as it was, didn't compare to the real thing. He passed by Lethiri, who glanced at him in disbelief as he sped ahead, his form disappearing into the darkness below. "What? How?" she muttered, her voice weak and breathless. The pain from the acidic water was becoming unbearable, and she knew she couldn't make it much farther. But Sam didn't seem to be affected at all. At the bottom of the simulation, Sam found the artifact, a crystalline orb nestled within a bed of jagged rocks. It pulsed with an eerie glow, casting light through the dark waters. With a shrug, Sam grabbed it, examining it briefly before beginning his ascent back to the surface. By the time he reached the platform, several other students had already been pulled from the simulation, their suits damaged beyond repair, or their minds unable to cope with the simulated trauma. Professor Zilkran looked on with his predatory grin, seemingly enjoying the failures of his students. But when Sam casually tossed the orb onto the platform, Zilkran's grin faltered. "You completed the task already?" the professor growled, his 4 eyes narrowing at Sam. Sam wiped the water from his face and shrugged. "Yeah, it wasn't too hard. Kind of relaxing, actually." The other students, still struggling beneath the crushing depths of the simulation, had no idea how much further behind they were. For Sam, this had been a minor inconvenience. For them, it was a life-or-death struggle, and for the first time, Zilkran realized that the human wasn't like the others. He wasn't just surviving the challenges, he was thriving in them. Chapter 3. The Volcanic Gauntlet. The atmosphere in the preparation room before the volcanic gauntlet simulation was tense. The students, already shaken from the abyssal descent, exchanged glances of both determination and trepidation. Many of them had barely survived the previous test, their physical and mental exhaustion evident in the way their limbs trembled or their eyes darted nervously around the room. Even those who had fared better weren't confident. After all, this was the volcanic gauntlet, a trial so feared that even the bravest elite soldiers hesitated before facing it. At the front of the room, Professor Zilkran stood with his arms crossed, surveying his students. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, his scaly lips pulled back into something resembling a smile. He relished the tension, the fear, the desperation. He knew this test would break many of them, but what excited him most was watching how they would crumble, how their confidence from the abyssal descent would falter as they faced an environment that offered no respite. "Prepare yourselves," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The volcanic gauntlet will test not only your physical endurance, but your mental fortitude. You will face rivers of molten lava, toxic gases, and the very air itself will burn your lungs. You must retrieve a core sample of a rare mineral deep within the volcanic field. Return it to me and you may pass. Fail," and he let the words hang in the air, the threat unspoken but clear. The students activated their environment-specific suits, each tailored to their species. They wore protective gear designed to withstand extreme heat, radiation shielding to block harmful gamma rays, and breathers capable of filtering out toxic fumes. Their bodies were armored against the horrors that awaited them. But none of it felt like enough. Sam, standing off to the side, equipped himself with the bare minimum, a simple heat-resistant suit and a face shield that looked out of place compared to the elaborate equipment of the others. His calm demeanor hadn't changed since the first test. He rolled his shoulders, as though preparing for a leisurely jog rather than a death-defying trek through one of the most hostile environments in the galaxy. The other students looked at him with confusion and in some cases outright disdain. "How is he so relaxed?" whispered Garrix, a bipedal creature with skin as hard as obsidian from the planet Draktarn, a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived. "Does he think this is a game?" "No one survives the gauntlet without the proper gear," muttered Kreshik, the insectoid student whose exoskeleton had barely held up during the abyssal descent. His compound eyes shifted to Sam, a mixture of anger and fear swirling within them. "He's a fool if he thinks he'll make it." Letheri, still recovering from the previous simulation, looked over at Sam with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. "I don't know how he does it. He shouldn't have made it through the last test, yet here he is. Maybe humans are different." Before anyone could respond, the simulation began. The walls of the preparation room shimmered, and suddenly the students were no longer standing in the safety of the academy. They found themselves in the middle of a volcanic wasteland, Towering volcanoes loomed in the distance, their peaks spewing columns of ash and fire into the sky. Rivers of molten lava snaked through the jagged rocks, their intense heat palpable even from a distance. The ground trembled beneath their feet as violent tremors rocked the landscape, and the air was thick with sulfur and ash, making it difficult to breathe even with the respirators. The students hesitated for a moment, taking in the sheer scale of the devastation around them. This was no simple test, it was a nightmare. Zilkran's voice echoed through the simulation. The clock is ticking. You must retrieve the core sample and return within the time limit. Remember, the volcanic activity will increase as you move deeper into the field. Good luck. The students began their journey, navigating the treacherous landscape with caution. Every step required careful calculation. One wrong move, and they could fall into a river of lava or be crushed by a falling boulder. Already the temperature was unbearable. The protective suits were working overtime, struggling to keep the heat from overwhelming their wearers. The ground cracked and split beneath their feet, sending small geysers of steam shooting into the air. Sam, however, moved through the simulation with an almost careless ease. He hopped from rock to rock, his movements fluid and precise. The heat didn't seem to bother him. The tremors were nothing more than minor inconveniences. He barely glanced at the rivers of lava as he leaped over them with the agility of someone completely in tune with his environment. Letheri, who was lagging behind, watched in disbelief as Sam navigated the dangerous terrain without breaking a sweat. She struggled to keep her breathing steady, the intense heat causing her aquatic physiology to rebel against the hostile environment. Her suit was designed to keep her moist, but even with its advanced technology, she felt herself drying out. How is he doing that? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rumbling of the ground. Krashik nearby growled in frustration as he tried to keep up. His exoskeleton was cracking from the heat, the protective layers buckling under the strain. He's a Deathworlder. This is nothing to him. Up ahead, Sam had already reached the core sample, a glowing blue crystal embedded deep within a volcanic crevice. He examined it for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the best way to extract it without triggering a collapse. With a quick, precise movement, he dislodged the crystal and tucked it into a small pouch on his belt. As Sam turned to make his way back to the start, he noticed several of the other students struggling to navigate the increasingly unstable environment. A massive tremor shook the ground, causing one of the smaller volcanoes to erupt nearby. A river of lava began to flow directly toward the group, its intense heat melting the rocks in its path. Without a second thought, Sam sprinted toward the group, moving with a speed and confidence that stunned everyone. He reached Letheri first, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her to safety just as the lava flowed past where she had been standing moments before. "Wow, what are you?" she stammered, too shocked to comprehend what was happening. "No time," Sam said, his voice calm but firm. "Move now." He led her and a few of the others toward higher ground, avoiding the cascading lava and the falling rocks with a practiced ease. As the ground continued to shake and the air filled with ash and smoke, Sam guided the group back toward the start of the simulation, navigating the increasingly dangerous landscape with an almost supernatural sense of awareness. By the time they reached the platform, only a few minutes remained on the clock. The remaining students stumbled in, exhausted and barely able to stand. Their suits were scorched, their bodies pushed to their limits. Yet Sam stood there, completely unscathed, the core sample in hand, as if the volcanic gauntlet had been nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Zilkran, watching from the safety of the control room, narrowed his eyes at the human. He had expected the Deathworlder to do well, but not like this. There was something unsettling about how easily Sam had handled the challenge, how effortlessly he had survived where others had nearly perished. The professor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Impressive, human, but the final test awaits." Sam smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "I'm ready." Chapter 4, The Final Trauma. The final test was legendary, known simply as the Void Traverse. No simulation had a higher failure rate, and none inspired as much terror among the Academy's students. It was designed to mimic the most hostile and dangerous regions of deep space, where black holes, rogue asteroids, and deadly gravitational anomalies reigned supreme. To succeed, students had to pilot a spacecraft through a dense asteroid field, retrieve lost data from a derelict satellite, and return to the start, all without being torn apart by the environment or losing control of their ship in the crushing gravitational forces. The students who had made it this far were visibly shaken. The abyssal descent had pushed their bodies to the breaking point, and the volcanic gauntlet had tested their mental endurance. But this was a whole new level of danger. In the preparation room, Zilkron addressed the group for what would be the last time. His voice was cold, devoid of any sympathy. "This test is simple," he said, his 4 eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Retrieve the data from the satellite and return. However, I must warn you, very few survive the void traverse. The gravitational anomalies will tear apart your ships if you aren't careful, and the asteroids will crush you in seconds. There is no mercy in the void." The students filed into their simulation pods, each one designed to simulate a spacecraft's cockpit. The pods were equipped with advanced controls, and the simulation would be as real as possible. The cold vacuum of space, the disorienting effects of zero gravity, the overwhelming pull of nearby black holes. As the simulation began, the students found themselves suspended in the vast emptiness of space. The asteroid field loomed ahead, dense and chaotic, with massive rocks tumbling through the void at breakneck speeds. Beyond the field, a faint glow marked the location of the derelict satellite, barely visible amidst the swirling gravitational anomalies. Sam took a deep breath, his hands steady on the controls. This was familiar territory. Earth had taught its people to navigate the unknown, to face dangers head-on. He had trained for this, surviving the most treacherous environments, from deep ocean to high altitudes and now deep space. The other students struggled almost immediately. The gravitational forces were unpredictable, causing their ships to lurch violently as they tried to avoid the asteroids. Krashik, in particular, was having difficulty. His ship spun wildly out of control, narrowly avoiding a collision with a massive rock. I can't stabilize." Krashik's voice crackled over the comms, panic evident in his tone. Sam's voice cut through the noise, calm and reassuring. "Ease off the thrusters. Let the gravity do the work. Don't fight it, guide it." Krashik, desperate, followed the advice, and his ship steadied, though the strain was visible in the way his claws gripped the controls. Meanwhile, Sam expertly maneuvered through the field, weaving between asteroids with a grace that seemed impossible. The gravitational anomalies tugged at his ship, but he adjusted his trajectory with the precision of someone who had mastered the laws of physics. He reached the satellite in record time, docking with ease and downloading the necessary data. As he prepared to return, Sam noticed that several of the other students were still trapped in the asteroid field, their ships battered and barely operational. He hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. "Stay on my wing," he said over the comms. "I'll guide you out." One by one, the struggling students formed up behind Sam, their ships barely holding together. He led them through the asteroid field, navigating the deadly obstacles with a precision that left the others in awe. Every move he made was deliberate, calculated, as though he could see the gravitational forces before they acted. When they finally emerged from the field, battered but alive, the students let out sighs of relief. Sam, still calm, transmitted the data back to the start point and landed his ship without a scratch. Zilkran watched in silence, his expression unreadable. The students who had once feared and mocked Sam now looked at him with a mixture of awe and respect. He wasn't just a survivor, he was something more, something dangerous. As the simulation ended, the students climbed out of their pods, exhausted but alive. Sam, as always, remained composed. Zilkran stepped forward, his 4 eyes locking onto Sam. "Human," he said slowly, his voice cold and measured. "You have exceeded my expectations, but tell me what drives you, what makes you so resilient?" Sam looked at the professor for a long moment, then smiled. "It's simple," he said. "On Earth we learned early on, adapt or die." The other students stood in silence, their eyes wide with realization. Sam wasn't just surviving these tests, he was thriving. And for the first time they understood why humans, Deathworlders, were the most feared species in the galaxy.